Hello fellow audiophiles, I am Wave Theory and I am back today to do a review of the HiFiMan Sundara Closed Back Edition. A $399 US closed back, full size, around the ear, planar magnetic headphone. But before I dive into the review, please stay tuned for this quick act of shameless self-promotion. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. All right. So, quick disclaimers. HiFiMan sent me the Sundara closed back for review. They have asked for nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation, and they have made no attempt to influence my opinion one way or another on this piece or anything that they have sent me for that matter. They have been a very hands-off company to work with in that way. Just to work with in general. Okay, so as I mentioned in the intro here, this is the Sundara closed back, and it lists for $399 US direct from HiFiMan's website, to which I will put a link down below. Now, I looked to see if Apos, who is an affiliate, a sponsor of mine, carries this, and not yet that I can tell. But someday in the future, if they do start carrying it, I will likely add a link in the description, which will be an affiliate link where you can buy that from Apos. Again, not there yet as of the filming of this video, but may be there someday in the not distant future. Okay. Other design elements of this, other than being a closed back, as HiFiMan says that this is a beechwood cup here. Now, it has a nice, pleasant wood grain look and finish to it. When I picked it up, I didn't quite believe that it was wood, but they say beechwood on there, so I don't know, it's polished to a level where I could be convinced it's not actually wood, but I will take them at their word that it is for now. Okay, other features here are that it does have the stealth magnet tech that HiFiMan is using with their planar magnetic headphones these days. So that's in here, and they also have the Neo Super Nano diaphragm that they've been talking up. Other specifications of note is that it has a rated impedance of 20 ohms with a rated sensitivity of 97 decibels per milliwatt. And they give it a mass of 432 grams. Glancing down here, reading it off of the stock packaging box, which I have something to say about this packaging box, and I will get to that in a clip here in a moment. All right, but I want to keep talking about the build here first. So, we also see here a suspension strap headphone or headband system, which is the same one that is on the Ananda and Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition, I believe here. And I found this system to be very comfortable on the Ananda. It's also very comfortable here on the Sundara Closed. Now, it is a very comfortable headphone. Now, some might get some sweaty ears going on from just warmth, temperature kind of warmth in the cup. I really didn't have a problem with that for the most part. I find it fairly comfortable, and a lot of that is the way that this headband system is constructed and how it distributes the weight and all of that. Okay. We have the classic HiFiMan dual 3.5 millimeter cable entry system going on here. And I say classic because this is not compatible with their Blue Mini little mobile DAC amp. And so you might see a fly buzzing around here. That could get annoying, but we're going to run with it. Okay, anyway. The cabling here works with just about any standard dual 3.5 millimeter headphone cable, so there's no special wiring that you need to worry about with this one like you did with the HER9 or the Deva Pro. Okay, so that is an ergonomic advantage, I think, here. And again, I think you're going to want to replace the stock cable. I took the stock cable out of the box, looked at it, and like, that looks exactly like the stock cables that HiFiMan has been shipping with their under $1,000 units lately, which means not great. I put it somewhere. I went to look for it for this review to show it to you, and I couldn't find it because it was not of interest to me. Okay, I used heart cable a heart cable a lot for this review, and I think that's kind of a value and performance sweet spot for a headphone of this price, is to get a heart cable or maybe an audiophile Ninja, as I think a lot of people are going to want to do that. Particularly if you want to plug this into a balanced amplifier, because the stock cable is only wired to be single-ended. Right, so that's a lot of the build and the features, I think, of the headphone itself. I do think it is a nice looking unit. I've got two things coming up here to show you. One, I made the comment a moment ago about the stock packaging, and there's a cool feature in there that I want to show you that is similar to what was on the Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition that I missed in that review because I just didn't even know to look for it. But I saw it this time. I will show it to you. I think that's cool. So that will be a clip here in just a second. The other thing that I'm going to do, and I'm not sure how well this turned out, to be honest, but I'll put it in there. Just tell me if you like the idea or if you found it useful down in the comments. And that is, you took advantage of the YouTube medium and did a sound leak test, just using my microphone here, putting this on a headphone stand, making sure that the cups were as closed on the stand as I could get it, and just to see how sound leaked out, because the closed back nature of this kind of begs for a test like that. Like, can you use this in an office setting or something of that nature? So I have a test like that there. Because I will say that when I have it on my head, and even if I were to take my glasses off and I, snap my fingers around like this, I still hear my finger snaps fairly well. They are muffled compared to what would be in a closed back, or excuse me, an open back headphone. But I don't think the isolation of the out of ambient sounds is particularly great here, and I don't think the leakage of sound on the inside is particularly great either. So I have a clip where I play some music and use the microphone at a couple of different distances away so that I can illustrate the difference between this and the Ananda Stealth Edition, which is a fully open back, doesn't isolate or prevent leakage at all. Okay, just as a compare and contrast. And then after those things, we will jump into the sound. So I'm going to pause this video here, probably kill this fly because it's literally right on top of the camera right now. Okay, yeah, then I will be back to discuss sound. Did you just see it on the lens? It was right there. I'm going to leave it in. All right, see you guys in just a bit. I'm going to show you the box for the Sundara closed back here, and I don't always show the box unless there is something of note in here. So, I mean, it's pretty simple, like kind of a shoe box again, where we have, very simple, closed back, stealth magnet design, Neo Super Nano diaphragm, some specifications. Okay, but the reason I want to show this is like when you open it up, and I missed this in my HiFiMan Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition review, is there's a headphone stand inside here. This part pulls out. Okay? And it ideally becomes a headphone stand. Now, this particular one doesn't seem to be that great at it though, because I noticed this one has a little bit of a, see how well this shows up here, a bit of a plasticky nubby thing here on the back, or on the bottom I should say, and like it's not flush, so this particular unit has a bit of stability issues. But I mean, it does spin around like a video game pickup, so there's that. Okay, but anyway, I suspect that's just an issue with this piece in here. Out of the way. Sundara box out of the way, because I went back and I pulled out the box that the Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition came in, and there's that headphone stand that people in the comments said I missed. Pull that out. No odd nubby thing on the bottom. Okay, sits nice and flat on the table. All right, now stability wise, it's not bad. Okay. But it's all made of foam, so I don't know how long that will last. But it's there as an option, kind of a cool, interesting little thing that HiFiMan has included. So just thought I would show that to you. Okay, on to the next part of the review. Right, going to use the power of the YouTube medium here to just do a quick sound check on this, so you can see like how much or how little the sound leaks from this HiFiMan Sundara closed back design here. So the album Polygon Dwanaland by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I'll put a link down. I'm using this music because it's open source, and so I won't get sued. Okay? Anyway, I'll put a link down for them below. Check them out. They are really cool. Of course, the name King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is amazing. Okay? Oh, this is the FIO M11 Plus, by the way. Review coming. Okay. So anyway, check out their music. Open source here. I have the volume set to play at about around my reference level-ish, maybe just a little bit lower. It's about 68 to 70 dB AV, according to my smartphone-based SPL meter, which is, of course, super reliable. But it's just under where I normally listen for critical listening, and probably just above what I would do for, like, office background listening. Okay? So I'm going to stick the microphone right down here and just let you listen for a second. Alright, and now I'll back the microphone up here to approximately 6 feet / 2 meters away from the headphone. See if you can hear it. Alright, that's the sound leak test. Alright, actually after I went back and watched that sound leak test and realized I really need to give you a reference point for like closed versus open. So this is the exact same thing with as close to the same levels as I could get it with the Ananda Stealth Magnet Edition, which is open back. Right, and we'll hear the difference here hopefully. So play. Alright, backing up to about 6 feet 2 meters away, sounds like this. Alright, I realize this is not a perfect test, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the sound leakage if that's important to you. Alright, we're back to talk about sound. Now, that fly may still be around, so if I pause this suddenly, it's because I don't want to have to put a disclaimer that there were no animals harmed in the filming of this video. Anyway, on with the sound of the Sundara closed here. It is a mixed bag, unfortunately. Now, let me set the stage here a little bit because it should be no secret if you watch my channel that I think HiFiMan's open back offerings, particularly those big egg-shaped units, and I also really liked the Deva Pro, are that they are really strong performers and that they tend to be either at the top or very near the top in terms of overall technical performance at their various price points. Particularly that's when the Aria SE, which it may still be, was like down at $1,300, and the Ananda Stealth Magnet is at like $699, and like those sorts of things like that. Those are just really hard units to beat at those prices. HiFiMan is not as experienced with closed backs, and so in moving into closed backs, it's kind of reasonable to expect there's going to be some growing pains, and I think that's what we have going on here a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some real strengths to the sound here, but there is also a drawback that I'm going to get to here in a moment as well. Okay, so the tuning here is, I'm going to say, mostly neutral, but there is some mid-forwardness to it, which may make me sound like a broken record, because I pick up on mid-forwardness pretty quickly. But that's here again. And then there is a little bit of warmth in there. So, I mean, I think they are going for their kind of HiFiMan neutral sort of tuning, but there is some added mid-range energy that creates an overall mid-forward presentation. So the tuning, I think, unfortunately, top to bottom, from 20 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz, or 20 Hertz to 20 kilohertz, is not as strong through the entire range as HiFiMan's open back offerings have been. Okay, now, Some people are going to like the amount of added mid-range presence that is in here. They're going to call that presence, they're going to call it clarity, or they're just going to call it bringing the vocals to the front, because it does all of those things. To me, that harms the timbre. So I think that unfortunately these are on the lower end in HiFiMan's offerings in terms of having a natural timbre to them. And timbre is an important thing that I listen for. So that's unfortunate for me, but there are other strengths here, so that if you like mid-forward presentations and you like the strengths that I'm about to name here, that may not bother you. These could still be for you. So, what are these strengths that I'm mentioning here? Well, there is actually some pretty good bass extension, punch, slam, physicality, that sort of thing. So I should say I have not heard the open Sundara. That one has been around for a while. HiFiMan has not sent that to me because I can understand they've had other models to prioritize getting reviews out for. My understanding of that Sundara is that it's more of like a neutral bright kind of tuning. It's not known for its bass presence or its extension, its slam, that sort of thing. It's not that it's a poor bass performer, it's just not the star of the show. Here there is a fair amount of low-end oomph going on, and the bass is pretty well controlled. I didn't really get the sense that it was overly sloppy or muddy for a product of this price point. In fact, I was quite impressed with the bass performance here for a $400 unit. Okay, because there is some good extension. There is a healthy amount of punch and slam and overall macrodynamic physicality to it. There's pretty good pitch definition and articulation in there, and then there's also like a healthy amount of bass texture, which again for a $400 unit is quite impressive. So that aspect is good. The closed back nature, I think, here helped out with some of that, but there is some pretty good bass performance in here, and I think only the most ardent of bass heads is going to not be satisfied with the amount of bass. Now, we are not talking like a Fostex TH or TR-XOO series kind of amount of bass, because I know those sold in the $500 price range, but not really far behind that either. Another strength that carries over from HiFiMan's open back offerings here is the sound staging and the spatial performance, the imaging and the separation. Now, these do not sound as big or as grand as the big egg-shaped open backs can sound. So it's not as huge in the staging. And so therefore the presentation feels a bit more in the head than those bigger ones do. But nor is it overly intimate or small. It never felt claustrophobic for me in terms of the staging either. Okay, but the imaging and the separation for a closed back of $400 is also excellent. I found a reasonable degree of holographicity, which I know is not a word, but it should be, okay, in the spatial presentation. Don't expect a ton of depth. I mean, it is a $400 unit. It's not wall of sound. There is a hint of depth, but it's not that's not going to be a strength. But laterally, there is a pretty reasonable sense of placing sounds and also placing space in between those sounds to go with it. So good job there. All right, and so that kind of, I think, sums up the strengths and weaknesses here. Strengths are bass performance overall, and then the spatial performance there is a good carryover for the HiFiMan sound. I did not detect a ton of sibilance, like sometimes HiFiMans have a reputation for being a bit hot and sharp in the treble. Not a huge issue here. It has some good air to it, but I didn't notice a ton of sibilance going on, even in some tracks that are like designed to really draw that out. Okay, so that I think is another strength. And then resolution, it's a fairly resolving headphone for being $400, being closed back, all of those caveats. I would also put resolution in as one of the strengths. So there is a lot to like about this headphone. I personally am not a fan of the amount of mid-forwardness in the tuning. It sounds honky, it sounds shouty to me. It does not sound natural through the mids like I am used to from HiFiMan's house sound, particularly their open backs. Now, I am noticing this trend of mid-forwardness in their closed back offerings because I have the HER9 here that I have a review for recently, and this one also had some of that mid-forwardness in it. And then I also have around the HER10D, which is the grown-up version of this one. Okay, and all three of them have that mid-forward presentation. They vary to the degree in which it bothers me, and that mid-forwardness is not always centered in the same frequency range, but it's there on all of them, which kind of messes up the timbre through the mids. Okay, for me, the tonal balance and the timbre through the mids for me, unfortunately. But again, it never got to the point where it was painful. Sometimes mid-forwardness can become physically painful for me at my reference listening levels. That didn't happen here. It was more of just an annoyance and a dislike for me in that regard. Okay. So again, that I think is one of the growing pains we're talking about here, when a company that has, in my opinion, pretty much nailed open backs and open back tuning, transitioning to doing the same in closed back is, it's not easy. So I think there are a couple of growing pains here, and hopefully in future generations they will smooth out that mid-range frequency response a little bit and bring it more back in line with what their open back offerings are and sound more natural in the process. Okay. Let me talk about driving this here a little bit and some amp pairings that I used for it. So because of the, 20 ohm impedance and 97 decibel sensitivity, it is fairly easy to drive. Like you saw in this sound leak video here that I had it plugged into the FiiO M11 Plus. The M11 Plus got it to plenty of volume there. I think there was one small sacrifice in that there was not a lot of physicality. Some of that bass punch and that macro dynamic impact faded a little bit on the attack with the M11 Plus. Not poor, not devoid of those things, just not as strong as it was from desktop offerings. On the subject of desktop offerings, I plugged this into the stack of the Schiit Modius and Asgard 3. I tried it on HiFiMan's own EF400. It got some run on the Schiit Bifrost 2/64 with it feeding the Lake People G111, and then I tried it briefly on my big guns, the Berkeley Alpha Series 2 and the Vioelectric HPA V281. It does scale a little bit with increasing source gear. It's not going to be a legendary scale upper like the Sennheiser HD600 series, but it does improve with improved source gear. What I noticed the most jumping around on those signal chains is that mid-forwardness that I talked about varies quite a bit. I actually thought the mid-forwardness decreased to the point where it was more tolerable on the M11 Pro, that FiiO DAP, even though some of the macro dynamics were not there. That tuning was a little bit better. Didn't cure the problem, but improved it. The EF400, I thought, had that improved mid-range presentation. Again, not a cure. That mid-forwardness was still there to a level that I personally don't like, okay, but it helped it a little bit. And then, of course, the EF400, the physicality and the dynamics came back too. So that was a pretty good pairing. The Modius and Asgard 3, lots of dynamics, lots of physicality, good spatial presentation, but that mid-range was pushed forward a little bit more than usual on that stack as well. So that's unusual, I think, but for whatever reason, the interaction between that chain wasn't the best. Okay, again, unusual because I think the Asgard 3 previously has handled just about everything I've thrown at it in a reasonable price range pretty well. Although if memory serves, I'd have to go back and look. It pushed the mids of like the Focal Clear MG forward a bit too. I would have to go back and look, but that just rung a bell there. Okay. The Bifrost 2 and the Lake People was a fairly good pairing, but we start getting into that level, we're talking about a stack of gear that's probably way more expensive than most people are ever going to use to pair with this. It did help some with the mids, Again, not a cure, but again, I think it sounded good overall, minus that mid-forwardness, but we're talking about a signal chain there that's, you know, more than twice as expensive as the headphone itself, maybe 3 times as expensive, and so I don't think that's going to be a realistic pairing. I did try to EQ out that mid-forwardness a little bit with my Shit Loki Mini EQ. It helped. I think there is a little bit of a peak in the mids rather than a shelf, because even though I could EQ down the intensity of that forwardness, the tonal balance issue still remained. So the Loki Mini is just too blunt of an instrument to find and EQ down that peak, unfortunately, for those of you who like EQ. That's about as far as I go with EQ, is like the Loki Mini. So for those of you who enjoy solving the problem that is equalization, this could be a good project for you, okay? There we go. All right, let's talk some comparisons here real quick. Almost dropped it, okay? With the Sundara close, I think the HER9, because it is still listed at $369 US, is a good comparison. The Sundara is definitely going for a more refined, more critical listening kind of tuning and presentation, where this is going for more of a mainstream, you know, mobile on the go kind of a compete with the Beats and the Bose and the Sony XM active noise cancelers of the world. Okay. And so the tunings are different there. So I think there's a little bit more yet bass presence and punch slam here, but this sounded more muddy and bloated through the mid bass than this did by a fair degree. This one is just also more resolving. So if you want a more fun, active, you know, you like that mainstream tuning and you want just a little bit more detail than the Bose and the Sonys and all of that of the world offer, the HER9 is a good option. If you want a more refined overall listening experience, I think the Sundara closed comes in there. I will compare this briefly with the $500 Edition XS. This is not a great comparison because this is $100 more. It's also open back with a very different, you know, cup shape and all of that. And again, this has, the XS has the better tuning. It's more natural through the mids. And I think the open back nature of it helps a lot here. Huge sound stage in comparison, but also much sharper, more coherent, more realistic, more believable imaging and separation, positional effects within that sound stage. Okay. Again, not the fairest comparison, but it's out there from the same company, and I'm sure some will be interested in that. So there's a brief comparison there. I will also comment briefly on the comparison with the Focal Elegia. Now, it has been a long time since I have heard the Elegia. I have a written review of it, to which I will link to down in the description. It makes sense to do as a comparison here because that Adorama sale that runs fairly often usually sells the Elegia for anywhere from like $379 US to $429 US. So it's like right close into the $400 price point with this one, and it's closed back. Okay, so it makes sense that people would want to know. And I have to stick the caveat in here again that it's been a long time since I've heard the Elegia. So I'm not going to be able to get super fine grain in this comparison, but I can give some general impressions. The Elegia probably is just a little bit stronger than the Sundara in the macrodynamic punch. Like, that is a trait of the Focal house sound, is how physical they are, how much they hit you. The Elegia has that. I think the Elegia is going to be, it is also a little bit mid-forward in its tuning like this, but not as much to my recollection. So there is, all right, we're back. Little camera issue there, sorry. So the forwardness of the Focal Elegia compared to the Sundara, again, I don't think the Elegia is as mid-forward as Sundara, get going from memory here, but it does have a little bit more of that kind of metallic bite to the timbre that I didn't notice with the Sundara close. So there's a little bit of a give and take there too. Now, in terms of resolution, I'm going to have to take an incomplete on that. I remember the Elegia being a quite resolving headphone for what it was, especially at that $400-ish price. But so is the Sundara Close. So I'm going to say that I think they are both well-resolving cans. And so it's probably about a wash there. And then the Elegia, I think, probably it's a little bit more fixable with basic EQ. Like you can put a bass shelf in it to recover some of its stock bass leanness in terms of tuning and that sort of thing. Whereas the mid peak that was in the Sundara is harder to identify and you get rid of with just simple, basic, easier to use equalization methods. All that. Now, in terms of functionality and ergonomics, I think the Elegia has an advantage in that it might be just a little bit easier to drive and be a little bit friendlier for mobile amps because, again, like with the FiO M11 Plus DAP, I think some of the bass physicality was taken out of the Sundara Closed, which I doubt will be a problem with the Elegia. I haven't tried that pairing. I have tried Focal Radiance on that. It was pretty good punch there. But the Elegia is better about isolation, holding ambient sounds out and keeping the noise of the headphone in. Okay, so that is a trait of Focal's closed backs, is they are good at those things, about the isolation and preventing leakage, relatively speaking. So I think there's a distinct advantage there if you need an office headphone or if you are on the go, that sort of thing. Okay. But still, there is a lot to like about the Sundara. Some will prefer the sound of this to the Elegia, and I get that, and so forth. So for me, this is not a headphone that I would choose for personal use or listening very often or much at all, because that mid-forwardness is too much for me, and it's too much work to get it out of there. There are just other options that exist in the world of headphonery that I could use instead of that. However, I do think that the mid-forward presentation is in line enough that some people will just like it in stock configuration because of how it brings vocals forward and that sort of thing, and they're not going to be as bothered by the tonal imbalance or the lack of timbre through the mids as I am. That's perfectly fine, so it's there if you are interested in that. But again, I think that mid-forwardness is an issue with all of the closed backs that HiFiMan is putting out right now. And so I'm chalking that up to a company that has excelled at open back tunings, trying to move into closed back and just going through some growing pains. We'll probably get there with the tuning that's more like what they do in their open back offerings here within a generation or two. And I personally look forward to that a lot. Okay. I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the HiFiMan Sundara closed back. Please remember, like, subscribe, and now check out my Patreon and my PayPal and all of those things, so you can talk to me on Discord and that sort of thing. And as always, enjoy the music.